Hello and welcome back to the next One Piece review and discussion. We are here after last week's break to pick back up within the Elbaf arc, and things have taken a bit of a turn. The God's Knight or the Holy Knight have decided to take more action than they were already attempting to do. So they were trying to be a bit mischievous, play a bit of a game, go under the radar. Obviously, our Straw Hats and Giants got in the way, and things have certainly taken a bad turn. So, we need to talk about this. Without further ado, chapter 1146, A Stir in the Silence. And we continue with Yamato's cover story, and to nobody's surprise, what we had all predicted for many chapters of this, we see Ulti thanking Yamato for saving their lives and looking to serve. Okay, so we can see Ulti in page 1, and now I'm going to help Yamato and the rest of Wano, it seems like. So, being treated quite poorly by who's who. But, pretty standard, not to be like anything unexpected there, I guess. But it's nice to see what's happening outside of Elbaf, I guess. But back to Elbaf. Last we had left off, Loki was being tended to, being healed, being force fed by Luffy in very extreme ways, and was starting to recover his strength, albeit he was still shackled by one sea stone prism. And he said, I do know where Shanks is, but you've not upheld your end of the deal. Until the shackle comes off, I'm not telling you where he is. But Loki reminisces and says that it's so interesting to see how Luffy looks up to Shanks so much. And he almost sees himself in Luffy. Because he himself, as a child, looked up to a certain pirate. And we saw a brief flashback of this where Rox showed up to Elbaf when Loki was a child. Same old thing, Loki wanted to join his crew. He was a young kid, but he was strong, he could prove himself. Rox just said, okay, challenge me. And then we just see like Loki bleeding out and Whitebeard saying like, did you really have to pull a knife on a kid? So he seems to be a pretty extreme man, and it was very interesting why I guess Loki looked up to him, but maybe it was just the power he had is what he looked up to, and his sort of freedom is what Loki's always been trying to get. But pretty interesting. And then alongside that was the giant warrior pirate in action alongside Gabon, the pretty invincible ship. And Gabon was saying that he was hearing 3 abnormal voices. And if this is where Elbaf's at, and if it's like the end of days, then like we're kind of done. Like if Elbaf's in danger, like nowhere's safe. So that was an interesting perception of like how strong these holy knights are actually going to be. And then obviously we concluded the last chapter with the fire at the branch. The kids were about to step into it. The giants were doing all they could, and Jinbei just shoulder throws a whole wave of water onto the fire, puts it out. All the column pirates that were on the ship that Jinbei came with, the column pirates as they called themselves, have arrived. Everyone was happy. And then Gunko appeared on the deck of the ship, the flying Sval, like mist ship, and seemed to not take too kindly to Colin, especially not being at school and causing trouble. So we pick back up here where everyone's reaction, very shocked, very surprised. Gotta be the intruder, a human intruder. This has gotta be the person who outclassed the guards, who has been running around and kidnapping the kids. Like, they're a pretty dangerous individual. And the first thing Gunko says to them is that, like, did you just say I'm a human? Like, of all things. And, like, even Brooks, like, what? And she goes on a spiel about how she is a god. And Usopp is like, oh, another one. Like, are you just like an L or one of those celestial dragons? Like, why are you doing this? And now he's like, why go after the kids? And Gunko very cruelly explains that, a child should hold their tongue, so tells Colin to be quiet, but says that, their only option here was to do this with the kids to get them back to the Holy Land. And as she's talking, we see a brief shot over at Frankie Radical Beam and the giant lightning cloud that was chasing them. Seems like they've got away. Like Ripley's got Lilith, Bonnie, and Frankie all in hand, like running away, but they seem safe for now. But it is very quick. Like, they all cotton on pretty quickly that, she's talking about Marie Joie. She's definitely connected to the Celestial Dragons. And Usopp's like, she's not what I'd picture a Celestial Dragon to look like. And Brooke says, no, she's probably a lot worse. She's maybe even a rank higher. She is a God's Knight. So interesting that Brooke knows what a God's Knight is. I wonder if like Jinbei probably does, and Robin. I doubt the others would. But at least like, Brooke has lived for a long time. He knows all this information, so he seems pretty shaken by like a God's Knight, and even she agrees with it. She loves her position, I guess. And she begins to manipulate her arrows. And as Usopp's like screaming at it, he's like, whoa, 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 what's this arrow? What's going on? And he's running around the ship while the arrow is constantly chasing him. As we've seen Gunko explain, the arrow predetermines the attack, but the attack can't be avoided. It is fate that the arrow will hit a predetermined attack. And as Nami tries to rattle up Zeus and send an attack at her, Gunko doesn't even flinch and just redirects a shark lightning Zeus the other direction back at Nami. So she's like concentrating on one arrow and just flicks another arrow to like flip Zeus round and send him back. And Zeus is like, I don't know what's going on, but like, Nami, you've got to run. I can't control this. And Gunko is in her monologue now saying, the world was simply meant to vanish one day. But, some other people are not going to take it lightly. That's just how it was supposed to go. Just quietly vanish. But, again, some humans have realised this, and they made sure that the entire world would know. And we see the shark Zeus connect with Nami, but it's not Nami because Brooke was the one who got hit by it. Because we see a skeleton outline that we thought it was Nami, and then Nami's doing that like pull a tongue face that she does, and poor Brooke is burned to a crisp because he's the skeleton. I see the joke that Owen was going for there. But Usopp let out a big attack, his like big signature skull explosion attack, and it shreds Gunko's body in half. She just like disintegrates. It's just like her legs. And they're all stood up. They're all like, amazing. We're not afraid of a celestial dragon. Like, we can take her. And poor Usopp's and like crying, like, I was a bit overkill. Apologies. Like, I didn't mean to blow her away. I'm so sorry. And then Gunko just starts to regenerate. Her whole body, like fragment by fragment, begins to rebuild. And even Brooke's like, well, this is weird for me to see the dead come back. Like, whoa. Now, the way she like rebuilds a body is more like paper shreds, like atoms rebuilding, and not like the arrows. Because I thought if it was going to be her arrows that rebuild, it would like swell and like she'd rebuild herself that way. But it's more like origami. Like, she rebuilds her whole body in these fragments and comes back, and she jumps on top of an arrow, and she's like, this world-ending thing, it can't be stopped. No one can stop it. And we see the arrow pointing at Usopp again for having done the attack. Jinbei and Brook step forward, and as they are like going to stop Gunko in some way, this telegraphed attack that is so absurd to be believed, she explained that the world is already in the opening stages of the coming Great War. And we see like the giants are like dealing with the monsters elsewhere, like Dory and Broggy and the giant pirates. And Gunko begins to state that the Giants Alliance is going to greatly shape the conflict that is to come. And we see an incredible funny shot of Luffy and Loki both like full up in that very anime style, like just eaten to the brim, like the huge bodies. So they've got that in common as well. So I'm seeing again more parallels between Luffy and Loki and what they're gonna do in their alliance, because I don't believe for a second that the Giants are going to side with obviously the Celestial Dragons and the Holy Knights, but it's just what's going to get them to side eventually with Luffy and the others, which is bound to happen. But apparently it seems that the Giants have a big sway in what this war is. They obviously were the great giant warrior race before Harold decided to change things up a bit. They don't want to be giants, so he certainly made that decision with some knowledge in mind. What they're going to do now is probably the bigger question. But we can see Jinbei, Nami, everyone is saying how, the world's not going to end. Taking kids hostage is just cruel. And Gunko's like, I'm just carrying out a mission. The concept of hostages, they're just the lives of some worthless children to her. She's like, I'm of not any concern. And to the point where, just like with the wolf, she takes Colin up into the air with an arrow and begins to wrap it around his neck and throw him aside. We see Brook and Jinbei ready attacks, and they are redirected to each other. Gunko just darts past, uses a fated arrow attack, which is pretty cool. Both attacks hit each other. So Jinbei punches Brook, Brook stabs Jinbei. So her arrows are not only able to determine her attacks, she can determine other people's attacks, which is now infinitely more stronger for this devil fruit. And we see she drop kicks Nami. The arrow lines up on Usopp, and she does a flying kick. So it doesn't seem that any of the Straw Hats here are capable of stopping Gunko. And we see this really cruel shot of the ship in the distance, and everyone's falling off the side. Colin's up in the air, and we see Killingham is on the transponder to Summer, and he's like, whoa, it seems like the communication network's very limited over here, but these major places in the village do have these really important points of interest that will have a big transponder. And we can see that Killingham is inside the school, already dealt with all the teachers, and decides to shoulder throw the head teacher for good measure. So we can see that Ange is the only one still semi-conscious. She's paralyzed, and he uses a sleep paralysis on her. And he looks at the teledictation. He's like, "Oh, Summer, I've got it working. Are you able to now speak through this teledictation snail as a sort of convoy then to speak to the whole island?" Because that'd be pretty useful. And Summer is on top of all his briar, on top of all his thorns, and he's staring down a very beaten and very bloodied Saul. And he's like, "I'm just going to need a sec, but this guy should go down now, Killingham, don't worry." And we can see he's covered in wounds, there's briar everywhere, A really interesting thing is all his Briar are like not like in dark coloured, but he's holding a Briar like staff or a Kanabo that we've seen, Kaido wielding, but it's like much bigger because we see a small shot of it like reaching up, and he's just like got it over his shoulder. And in the final moments of like before Saul's about to fall, he tells Robin and Chopper to stay in his hair hidden because he wants them to take care of the kids when they get the chance. So all this is kind of kicking off. We can see he falls to the ground. Robin's in distress now. And the chapter ends with Summer explaining, a school library, peaceful, like you are meant to be warriors. There was a time when, the giant would have shook the world. And he says, you were supposed to be mercenaries. Isn't that right, Harold? King Harold really messed everything up. And that is where the chapter ends. So this noble king, as it says, what could he have possibly done? And clearly it was Harold had caught wind, or they spoke to Harold to make the giants into these mercenaries to help the world government, but really he knew the truth of what was going to happen. So instead he turned everyone into like peaceful giants. He wanted the next generation to not be warriors, so that they maybe wouldn't get pulled in or wouldn't become mercenaries to the celestial dragons, which I think is fascinating. So I think there's a lot more at play now between what happened those couple of 14 years ago or so, when obviously Loki killed his father, is what the stories say, but I don't think it's going to be a clear cut picture now, because a lot is going on. And clearly we didn't see what Kiringham and Summer actually made of in a fight, but the fights have ended pretty quickly on their part too. Gunko very swiftly dealt with like 4 or 5 of the Straw Hats with ease. Even like Jinbei and Brook, who are quite strong competitors, like absolutely nothing. So real issue there. I assume Sanji, Zoro, Luffy are gonna ascend back up here and are gonna, really stick it to these Holy Knights. But we'll see. Robin could also just be really pissed off now, and want to defend Saul. So there's no break next week, but it seems like things have took a very dangerous turn, and the Giants and the Straw Hats are on like a bit of a back foot. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. But thank you so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this chapter, and I will see you guys next time.